What's going on, guys? Welcome into the Fantasy Slant. It is powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Mike Tagliere. We are back. It's week 5 in the NFL. There was a lot of stuff that went down last week. I'm sure Kevin has a lot to say about it. We're going to check in with him. He's my co-host here, Kevin Cole. Kevin, what were your thoughts on week 4 before we get into touching on week 5? Any big takeaways that you had from it?
I mean, I think generally it was kind of a disappointing week. I mean, there weren't a lot of big fantasy scores out there. I don't know if there was a lot to take away from it. I think expectations were kind of held in check. My man, Devontae Freeman, who I was not high on this year, came out with another really strong performance. So, at a certain point, you kind of got to see where things are going, and especially with the running back position. So I think that was a surprise that he came out a couple of weeks in a row to put up such huge performances.
Yeah, it was. And the weird thing is I thought I was high on him last week. I ranked him at number 13 on Fantasy Pros, and I apparently was too low on him. His ECR was like 11. But the weird part for me was that Houston hadn't allowed a rushing touchdown all year long. And then all of a sudden, they allow 4 to the Falcons. Teron Ward got 1 and Freeman the other 3. It was a weird week like that. And then the Bengals, the Chiefs, they hadn't allowed a rushing touchdown all year. And then the Bengals score 4. It was just very, very odd is the best way for me to put it. So it was a down week for me a little bit, but we're looking to bounce back this week. Got some good tidbits for you guys. We're going to talk about, we're going to touch on every single NFL game. Before we do that, make sure you guys follow us on Twitter. You can follow Kevin at Cole_Kev, myself at Mike Tagliere NFL. But getting right into these slates of games because we have a lot to cover. There's a whole lot of games. We do have a few bye weeks though. We have the Dolphins who just fired their head coach. They're on a bye, which is, I guess, much needed with how they've been playing. We have the Panthers, who are also on a bye. We have the Jets, and who's the last team, Kevin? Who's the last one? I'm forgetting right now.
The Vikings.
The Vikings, yes, the Vikings. So Adrian Peterson out of fantasy lineups. He actually did better last week than I thought he would against Denver, but then again, you take away the long touchdown run, it looks a little bit different in the end. But starting out on Thursday night, I was worried that we were going to see this, I guess it's still possible. We were going to see this Matt Hasselbeck, Brian Hoyer / Ryan Mallett showdown. What's your thoughts on this, Kevin? Do you think that Andrew Luck's going to play?
I don't know. It's one of those situations where they squeezed out, the last week. So they probably need him to play. I mean, you figure him not playing last week had something to do with the fact that they were looking at the Thursday night game and looking for him to play then. So I hope so, but we'll end up seeing what's happening, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird. It's just like they just somehow magically happen to get the Jaguars and the Texans on their schedule when Andrew Luck happened to be going through the shoulder issue. But they re-signed Josh Johnson after releasing him, and then they said that was because Matt Hasselbeck was sick. And then Matt Hasselbeck was practicing. So none of it really adds up. They're starting to backtrack on the fact that they listed Luck as questionable for the game. I don't know if he's going to play. I think they might play it safe with him and say we can beat the Texans without him. And I actually think that that's the way that they're going to start leaning. And then just give him the week and a half off, another week and a half. That's the way I think that they're leaning. But the one that I'm curious about is if Vontae Davis is out. Because they're saying he's questionable. You saw him in a walking boot to start the week. He hasn't practiced all week. They've listed him as questionable. I don't know if he plays, but if Vontae Davis does not play, DeAndre Hopkins could have 200 yards. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility. I mean, I think a lot of people have been focusing on the tremendous amount of targets that Hopkins has been getting, but they're throwing the ball something like 60 times a game. So I think those target numbers will come down, but it doesn't mean that the offense can't be a little bit more efficient passing the ball. And they really have nobody over there. I'm really hoping that Jalen Strong gets into the lineup. I don't think he's been active the last few weeks. They have another rookie, what's his name? Keith Humphreys. Keith Humphreys. Now, I think Humphreys, I don't know how many times I could say that, was in there because of his special teams work. That's the reason he was activated. So you don't really know what Strong's usage was based upon after the guys went out last week because, like I said, he wasn't even active. Hopefully he's active. Hopefully he gets in there. I guess he's making some drops in practice, but I like to see rookies like Strong get into the game and see what they can do.
I do too, and it was curious because like you've seen in the training camp, if you watched Hard Knocks, you saw Jalen Strong kind of working his way back in, and after a few boneheaded mistakes, seemingly the first preseason game, it seemed like he got better as it went on, and I was curious why he wasn't even active, considering the depth that they, I should say, don't have, behind their starters, and now Nate Washington's banged up. Is he going to play? Have you heard anything about that?
I mean, I'm on the understanding that Washington and Shorts aren't going to play, but we'll end up seeing. Yeah, and I think the reason Strong wasn't playing was a special teams thing. But I mean, I think Strong, he really fits that potential, number one wide receiver role. I mean, obviously they have DeAndre Hopkins, so he's not necessarily going to slide into that. But he's a big dude, and he put up great stats. He could come around, and he's really extremely fast. So we'll see what he can do.
Yeah, but Mumfrees is definitely a sleeper for me this week. I think I went through my projections, my initial ones, and I had him somewhere around 60 yards. But that had more to do with the fact that I thought DeAndre Hopkins was going to see Vontae Davis quite a bit. And if Davis is out, it's going to change things as a whole. Because if Vontae Davis is out, if you have a Thursday night lineup, man, you put DeAndre Hopkins in your dailies and all that stuff, and just get him going. But we don't want to touch too much on that game. The curiosity comes from Andrew Luck. If Andrew Luck's playing, the Colts receivers, you got to play him. If he's not playing, you downgrade him, and that's where it becomes more of a question mark. And that's where you can find me and Kevin on Twitter to talk to us there, ask us those questions, or check out the rankings before game time. The next game is a bit of a letdown for me because it's going to be the Bills at the Titans. They announced LaShawn McCoy was going to miss a couple weeks, with this whole issue that he's having. He wants to get 100%. And, me being a Carlos Williams supporter, I was all for that. I'm loving it because I actually own Carlos Williams in, I think, 90% of my leagues. And now he's got a concussion, and that he may have played through it. They're saying he might have played through it, some of it last week. And now they're saying he's highly questionable. He hasn't even passed through the protocol. Would you feel comfortable picking up Boobie Dixon off the waiver wire and starting him in place? I mean, it is the Titans after all.
Yeah, no, I think I actually would be. I mean, I don't think he's very good, but it's one of those situations, kind of like I touched on 17 times last week, about the fact that when a starter or a committee guy is out, the rest of the guys going to get a lot of work. And now we have two guys down, so there's really nobody left. I mean, they're just picking dudes up off the street to come in there and play. So Dixon could get a lot of work, and he's a big guy. Also, he has decent, and so it's possible he could be involved in all three phases of the game. And they are the favorite, so if they can get a lead, they may just go ahead and pound it with him if he can get something going.
Right, and that's kind of where I see it. I mean, it's weird because this game, it seems like it's going to be a very, very low scoring one, where I know people are talking about Mariota being a good DFS option. I'm not huge on Mariota this week, and I usually am. The Bills have to turn it around at some point. I mean, we thought this defense was going to be, the new one that you wanted to shy away from, the new Seattle that your passing attacks wouldn't want to throw against. But it hasn't looked quite like that. I know they shut down Odell Beckham pretty much last week, but Eli Manning, they didn't. They haven't really shut down anybody completely. I know in Andrew Luck in week 1, he got 2 touchdowns late in the game, and we thought, well, those were garbage time. The Bills weren't really going to give it up. Since that time, the Bills they haven't looked like a very good defense, but they have to find themselves sooner or later. This game is in Tennessee, but Boobie Dixon could be an interesting spot start if you're desperate. You have like maybe Jonathan Stewart on a bye or Adrian Peterson, and you're looking for a running back because your others are banged up. He could be a good option for you. The next game we're going to move on to is another depressing one. It's the Cleveland Browns at the Baltimore Ravens, the Steve Smithless Ravens. This pass attack, Joe Flacco didn't look very good with Steve Smith. Now he's got Kamar Aiken, Marlon Brown. They traded for Chris Givens. What do you make of this Ravens pass game? Are you feeling comfortable starting Kamar Aiken as a wide receiver 3 or as even a wide receiver 2 like some are saying that he could be?
Well, I think wide receiver 2 might be a bit aggressive. I mean, the thing is, he's obviously been the most productive of any of the non-Smith wide receivers. I kind of like Crockett Gilmore if he can get back into the lineup this week. I mean, he's a guy who's gotten a little bit over 20% of the targets in games that he's played. He's been productive. He could be a kind of a dump-off option. So that's one guy. And another thing, when you're thinking about the wide receivers, I mean, Marlon Brown hasn't really done much as far as in terms of production, but he's still been targeted close to the same amount that Aiken has, and Aiken just put up bigger numbers. So Marlon Brown might be a guy, I don't know, if you're in a super deep league, you could just get it for free basically. And, everyone on your roster, is on bye or injured or I don't know, they've left town or whatever, you might be able to plug them in. You have to hold your nose at the same time, though.
Yeah, no, I'm a little off on Kamar Aiken. Me personally, if you can get something for him, if you're able to trade him right now, just try and sell him to the Steve Smith owner, whatever you can do. I mean, if you can get like a Nelson Aguilar for Kamar Aiken, I'd do it right now. Most people don't realize that Kamar Aiken was playing every bit of the snaps. He played, it was 225 of 200, I think 85 snaps possible. And he's been running routes. He's been out there. And honestly, without last week's game against Pittsburgh, their dreadful secondary, Kamar Aiken has got less than 100 yards in the season. He had no touchdowns. So last week made him look good. I know it was on national television, and that's why people are kind of pumped up about Kamar Aiken. I do think that you could use him as a wide receiver 3 fill-in. I just don't expect much of a ceiling with him. Flacco just hasn't looked very good. I think they're going to rely on the run game quite a bit. I could see Justin Forsett approaching 20 carries, and even Taliaferro and Javorius Allen or Buck Allen, whatever you want to call him, them two together combining for 10 carries. So we're looking at a 30 carry game. I just don't see Baltimore relying on Joe Flacco without Steve Smith. This injury bug that's kind of going around the NFL right now is frustrating because it's leaving us with these decisions of Keith Humphreys or Kamar Aiken. It's not good times in fantasy football.
Well, let's move on to the next game. Maybe we'll get to better times.
Maybe we will. I don't know how much better of times it is. I mean, I guess it is because Jay Cutler came back. Jay Cutler is the reason the Bears actually won a game last week against the Oakland Raiders. But this week they are traveling to Kansas City, one of the toughest places to play in the NFL, Arrowhead Stadium, against an Alex Smith-led Chiefs team. Alex Smith threw for like 320-some yards last week and didn't throw for a single touchdown. Can you believe that?
Yes.
There was no hesitation on that. We're
talking about Alex Smith here. Not throwing touchdowns is what he does. Only thing he does better than that is checking down.
He does check down quite a bit, and he's targeting Jeremy Maclin a lot. Maclin is all of a sudden rising up, and he's in that wide receiver 2 conversation again, where everybody's falling in love with him. But here's my thing: my piece this week that I did for Pro Football Focus is it's like my buy sell, my fantasy stock market, gauge everybody's interest. The ups and downs of Travis Kelce have led his owners to question who to start sometimes. And, well, maybe I should trade for this guy and just platoon them in good matchups. No, Travis Kelce is an every week starter. Things are going to even out. Here's my thing. I found on Alex Smith. This year, he has thrown touchdowns on just 2.8% of his passes. All right. So that's down because his career average with the Chiefs, even though he hasn't been, it's not like he's been a world beater or anything like that, but it's been 4.4%. So his touchdown, the regression is there. It's going to come up. And Travis Kelce is going to be, I just see him benefiting from this. I don't think that Alex Smith is all of a sudden going to start targeting receivers and he's going to start throwing multiple touchdowns a game to wide receivers. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think Travis Kelce this week could rival Gronk. I mean, I don't know if you're with me on that one, but I feel really strongly about Kelce against this Bears. I don't even know if you want to call it a secondary, this Bears mix that they have, behind that line of scrimmage.
Yeah, no, I think Kelce can have a big week. He's been getting over 20% of the targets, so he's been heavily targeted, especially for a tight end. Now, I'm not going to, blaspheme at the altar of Gronk, though. So let's not quite put him up there. Gronk's in his own category, but he's definitely a guy that's going to come around because, like you said, the touchdowns are a little bit flukier, but they're a huge component of tight end scoring. So once those start to come around, he'll get back into the mix and as far as being a top tier guy.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And like the thing is, when I was looking at, there's only been 3 tight ends this year that have scored 40 or more fantasy points in standard leagues. Last year at this time, there were 6 of them. So tight end scoring is down across the board. Don't think it's just Travis Kelce. Tight ends after week 1, it's seeming like they've dropped off. But Kevin, I know you are a huge Alshon Jeffrey supporter this year. I've actually gone out and tried to trade for him in a few of my leagues. The owners aren't biting. I mean, I'm willing to trade for him, but I'm not overpaying for him just yet because we don't even know if he's playing yet. But if he does play, are you going to play him like comfortably against, this Chiefs secondary that it looks like Marcus Peters would be the one lining across him, not Sean Smith?
Yeah. I mean, I think whoever else you have on your lineup is, of course, going to help determine that decision. If you have kind of a mid-range guy who's been playing well, then you may not want to risk it because he's always at risk for an in-game injury or something like that. But, they're 10-point underdogs They're going to pass the ball a lot. And I think what we've seen with Jeffrey out of the lineup, I mean, a lot of people liked, Eddie Royal or someone like that to step up, even with Jeffrey in the lineup. And there hasn't been a lot going on with the wide receivers. Of course, Cutler's had some time off, but there hasn't been a one dominant guy to come in there and to really take a big target share. Martellus Bennett has probably been their number one receiver, at least he was last week. So I think Jeffrey can step in and just be that alpha dog from day one. It's just really going to depend upon if he can go 100% and not have a mishap.
Yeah, no, I would feel very comfortable starting Alshon Jeffrey this week if he does play. And as a matter of fact, if Jeffrey plays, I'm probably going to be playing Cutler in a lot of places as a streamer. I know it's tough in Kansas City, but like you said, I think it was 9.5 points. That's just insane. Like, I don't know how the Chiefs are favored by 10 points over anybody, even the Bears. I just don't think the Chiefs are that good of a team. Their offense doesn't put up very many points. Their secondary is very weak. Jay Cutler could be a fine streamer. If that's your game, Jay Cutler's a fine play this week. But moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, whose offensive line looks like garbage. They look like hot garbage. And Thomas Rawls, I know a lot of people were relying on him Monday night if they had Lynch or whatever the case may be, but he didn't look good at all. But it may not have been his fault. Like, this offensive line just looks really bad. Lynch is rumored to be coming back. I think he's going to play. And he's due for one of those games, one of those Marshawn games where he, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. I don't know if it's going to come against the Bengals, but how are you on this whole Jeremy Hill, Gio Bernard time split? I ranked Gio a little bit ahead of Jeremy Hill last week. Apparently that wasn't the thing to do, even though he had just 40 yards. He scored 3 touchdowns. There's no way around it. How do you feel about this timeshare? Do you think they still those 3 touchdowns, do you think that gave the Bengals coaching staff trust in Jeremy Hill again?
I don't know if it was necessarily a trust issue. I mean, I think there is part of that. I think Gio Bernard is just very effective. I mean, he's been a more effective and more efficient runner. I think what they're trying to do this year, which is utilize their passing weapons more, Gio Bernard just fits a little bit more with that offense. If you look at what they're doing there, they picked up the pace a bit. They're running a bit more of kind of this read option sometimes. And they're letting Andy Dalton, throw the ball around a little bit. And that just kind of really fits into what Bernard's been doing. And you mentioned the Hill's production was very touchdown dependent. So if you were someone who was kind of on the fence about Hill, let's say a Hill owner coming on the fence about him after going into last week, and then after last week and those 3 touchdowns, you might want to look to ship him out because he was, I believe, outsnapped again by Bernard. And he was really just saved by getting those short touchdowns, which easily could have been, passing scores or touchdowns to Bernard.
He really was. And that's the thing that I talk about all the time, is just saying that, I don't know if you remember, Kevin, I'm sure you do, last year when Gio Bernard was the starter and averaging, 3.3 yards per carry, seemingly every single week. And Jeremy Hill was getting those 8 carries, running for 5 yards a carry, 6 yards a carry. And everybody's like, why isn't he getting more touches? Why isn't he getting more touches? And it took a Gio Bernard injury in order for Jeremy Hill to take that step into the spotlight and steal the starting job. Last year, Jeremy Hill, 5.1 yards per carry, Gio 4.0. But now here we are in 2015. Gio Bernard has 4 more carries than Jeremy Hill, but he has 137 more rushing yards. That's staggering. Like, that's behind the same offensive line, guys. That's nothing changes there. Except Jeremy Hill has 5 touchdowns and Gio Bernard has 1. I'm hoping for your guy to come back for me. Tyler Eifert has been kind of a letdown the past, couple weeks. Is there any hope against the Seattle secondary? Do you think that AJ Green is shadowed, by Richard Sherman? Like, what's your take on Tyler Eifert this week?
Well, I don't know if they'll be shadowing, but then normally the entire secondary kind of plays well as a unit for Seattle, so that takes away some of the wide receivers there. And then Eifert's still been getting good target share. I think he's had some fluky performances. He obviously had that 1 touchdown taken away another week, but of the non-Gronk tight ends, he's actually been decently consistent, other than the 1 goose egg he put up when he didn't get that touchdown. There's not a whole lot else in the tight end category. So I think that it's just a situation where you have AJ Green's going to get a lot of targets. Gio Bernard, other than last week, had been getting a lot of targets. And then you have, Marvin Jones and Sanu also in the mix. So it's going to be different guys in different times. Their over-under is 23 points, so it's not low for facing the Seahawks, and they are at home. So I think Eifert will get in the end zone this week.
Yeah, and the thing is like, I actually agree with you on that one. AJ Green's going to see Richard Sherman. Like, Sherman doesn't typically shadow receivers. He moved into the slot a little bit this year, but he typically is stationary at left corner. You didn't see him shadow Calvin Johnson. They put Kerry Williams on him. So if the Bengals are smart, they're going to move AJ Green onto that left side, and they're going to put him against Kerry Williams, and he's going to beat Kerry Williams. And hopefully Andy Dalton doesn't pull a Matt Stafford and completely miss him. I don't know how you miss Calvin Johnson, the two-car garage running down the field. But he did it. And Kerry Williams can be beat, and AJ Green can beat him. So I'm not shying away from starting AJ Green this week if that were a question mark in your head. But the next game is the team that basically went into Arizona and shocked everybody. The St. Louis Rams, they're heading into Green Bay this week. I don't think that there's an upset in this game. But Kevin, the player that I want to know about, the player that I think is being overhyped right now. I know what he just did against Arizona. I know. Todd Gurley. He went off. I get it. People were waiting for that performance. I get it. But everybody's all over saying he's an RB1. We were just waiting for this to happen. We were waiting. We knew it was there. And I'm not buying it. I still think that this offensive line is shoddy. I don't think this team is a team that's going to allow him to get 20 carries a game. I think the stars aligned last week for Todd Gurley, and I don't know. And I don't know if you know, Kevin, but we actually graded him out as a negative in that game.
That's a little surprising, but I agree with a lot of what you're saying. If you look at what he was able to do last week, I think he only ran the ball once on third down, and they have other options that they can bring in there on third down. And this is the type of game where, like you said, last week they shocked the Arizona Cardinals, and obviously it was a close game that they were able to pull out. This week they're 10-point underdogs. So it's going to be a completely different situation, and it's not really the most conducive situation to a large lead back who's really going to take the bulk of the first and second down carries if they were in a close game or were ahead.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, the line on this game, I didn't think it would be that high. I obviously think that the Packers are going to win. They're at home. We know what Aaron Rodgers does at home. It's kind of like a Tom Brady situation. But did you really think that they were going to be like that much of a favorite, like against the Rams, a team that has actually played pretty decent this year?
Yeah, I think it's really that home field factor. I feel like going back not only this year but then last year, you've just seen Aaron Rodgers be completely flawless and just hang some big numbers on the board. So I think that's part of it. Although, I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I might think about putting some money on the Rams to come in there and keep it close.
Yeah, no, but the weird thing is like the Rams are traveling not cross country, Arizona up to Green Bay. Green Bay coming from San Francisco, but they're at home. So obviously you're firing up James Jones. You're firing up Randall Cobb. James Jones is turning into what I thought Devontae Adams was going to be this year. I put all my eggs in that basket. It's burned me in a lot of leagues, to be honest with you. I don't think he's playing this week. I think that they're more than able to go on without him right now and let him rest up that high ankle sprain. But James Jones, man, I'm pretty comfortable saying that he's a rock solid wide receiver too, right?
Yeah, he keeps on performing. He obviously has a good connection with Aaron Rodgers. I think the question with him is going to be kind of a volume question, but you've seen that nobody else really has that much of a trust. James Jones's volume this year, he's getting close to 20% of targets, a little bit less. So it's not a lot, and I think he could put up some, his floor can be low. If he's not because sometimes he's only going to be targeted a few times. But I think with Devontae Adams out and Montgomery's not soaking up a lot of targets, the defense is going to be focused on Cobb. He's still going to be that second option on that team, and the second option in an Aaron Rodgers offense is someone that you're going to want some exposure to. You know
what's crazy, Kevin? I was just looking at this. 42 of 53 passes have been completed, like on targets to James Jones and Randall Cobb. 42 of 53 passes. That's like running back type numbers. Like the completion percentage, James Jones has caught 85% of his passes. Randall Cobb 76. Like that stuff just doesn't happen with wide receivers, guys. That's insane. Aaron Rodgers is obviously in control of what he's doing. James Jones is the number 9 fantasy receiver on the year with 20 targets. 20 through 4 games. Like that amazes me. That's 5 targets a week. But that's the efficiency that Aaron Rodgers throws with. So you're obviously going to keep riding him. The next game, is this the TJ Yeldon breakout game? The Jaguars at the Bucs. Everybody seems to run wild on the Bucs. I think TJ Yeldon is one of the few workhorses in the NFL that we could rely on for 16 plus touches a game. This should be a game where they should be able to do whatever they want against the Bucs. Whether it be Jameis Winston turning the ball over, whether it be Blake Bortles stepping up and throwing to Allen Hurts and Allen Robinson. How are you feeling about this Jaguars offense as a whole, man?
I think it's been obviously a pleasant surprise. I mean, Bortles, I think I saw somewhere he's like a top 10 quarterback or something like that. It's kind of insane. But this is a matchup where he is on the road. I mean, they are underdogs. Well, we'll see what ends up happening. I think Yeldon, like you mentioned, has looked good. This is going to be one of the better matchups for Yeldon because, normally the Jaguars are kind of heavy underdogs, and they're only going to be a 3-point underdog here. And a couple of misfires from Winston could put them right in the positive game script that Yeldon could take advantage of. But on the flip side of the ball, I think what we saw last week is that Doug Martin was finally able to put up some points because he was able to get into the end zone. And he hasn't really been that bad this year. They've just also been stuck in poor game script a lot because when Winston's throwing those pick sixes, you kind of really have to dig yourself out here. So this is a very rare opportunity also on that side of the ball is the fact that they're a home favorite. So it is something that could be good for Martin, although the Jaguars have been a decent defense against the run in the past.
I had to go back and check that. I had to look and see if Blake Bortles was a top 10, and he is. He's actually the number 10 fantasy quarterback, smashed in between Matt Ryan and Eli Manning. So he's got more fantasy points than Eli Manning and Ryan Tannehill. Wow. Like Blake Bortles getting it done, guys. Obviously, that's pretty good for the outlook on Allen Robinson and even Allen Hurns, I guess. But the funny part is that I just looked and Blake Bortles, his completion percentage is in the bottom 5 of the league. So it's pretty volume dependent. A lot of it has had to do with the matchups that they've had along the way. But this one should be a run-heavy game. TJ Yeldon is one of the few running backs that hasn't scored a touchdown yet, that is in that workhorse role. But I think that comes this weekend. I think that TJ Yeldon finally gets in there. I don't know. I'm hoping it happens. I know Melvin Gordon, we were all over him last week, and he wet the bed. He wet the bed. So I'm hoping the same thing doesn't happen with TJ Yeldon this week, but I'm starting him wherever I can. Great DFS option as well. Drew Brees came back last week. He threw for over 300 yards, but he didn't look like Drew Brees. Like, I don't know how else to put that. Drew Brees, that 80-yard touchdown boosted the numbers quite a bit at the end of the game, which, by the way, that play, that lost me a game in fantasy. I was fine. I just needed 3 points from Calvin Johnson, on Monday night, because I knew the kicker was going to make that field goal at the end of the game. Nope, he missed it. The other guy had CJ Spiller. So there goes Mike's fantasy game. So that kicker, out of New Orleans. God, I love that guy. But Drew Brees not able to get everything he wanted into his throws. It's obviously showing he's not going to be able to hit those downfield targets. Brandon Coleman seems to have dropped on the depth chart. Willie Snead has stepped up. I think that CJ Spiller is an excellent play going forward. I think he's only playing into the strengths of Drew Brees and kind of what he's going through right now. Do you agree with that when, the Saints head into Philly? Are you going to be able to play CJ Spiller confidently? I know you were all over Twitter talking about CJ Spiller and the fact, why aren't the Saints using him more? And then, of course, he has that 80-yard touchdown.
Yeah, well, it was a little humorous story here is that I was talking about that, and then, someone kind of came back in my mentions. It was one of these guys where if you check their feed, they have 50 different replies where they're just criticizing people. So he was basically saying, well, you don't know anything. The coaches know more than you know. And then that CJ Spiller play happened right afterwards. So that was sweet. But the problem is they really like Ingram. I mean, they obviously have some change in philosophy here. Ingram running the ball, he's catching the ball. I mean, he's not being awful. So I guess that's good for Ingram. But they need some dynamic playmakers in there because I'm not sure. I mean, obviously Brees had the shoulder issue, but even before the shoulder issue happened, they weren't stretching the field much, and they weren't throwing the ball downfield much. And I just think his wide receivers are just not stepping up. Brandon Cooks just does not look good. He kind of looks like Tavon Austin out there, quite honestly, or that sort of mold. And Willie Snead has actually looked like he might be their best receiver. And this is a guy who's a rookie, who hasn't really done much. It was a very low draft pick. So I think he's just got problems with his downfield options, and they're going to continue feeding the ball to running backs. So if you want to turn those the short passes into long plays, I think C.J. Spiller is your best option. I mean, I'm just hoping that Peyton realizes that and gets him in the game a little bit more.
Yeah, and I really figured that, I know we had the conversation heading into the year about Brandon Cooks, and like I wasn't as high on him as most people, but then again, I was high on CJ Anderson, so there's that. But I felt like Cooks was in that weird area where he wasn't necessarily that huge deep threat, but then they had CJ Spiller for the short stuff, and then Mark Ingram. I just felt like there was a whole lot going on, and I don't think anybody could have predicted that Brandon Cooks would kind of fall on his face as hard as he has. Like he's barely startable right now. I think that the frustrating part is he's going to have a week where he blows up, and you know it's going to happen. You know it. And most people are going to have him on their benches because they were sick of seeing his lines of 40, 50, 60 yards filling their wide receiver 2 slot. They may have traded him away. I think that Cooks, I don't know if I want to say that he's a buy low target, but I think that the Saints have to figure out a way to get him the ball more often. I don't know. I think Marcus Colston needs to see the field less and less. I mean, he just looks very old at this point. But CJ Spiller, like you said, I'm starting him. I think he's a good flex play, and especially if you play in PPR leagues, I think you're going to start seeing him routinely, catch 4 passes, if not more, a game, inside of that Pierre Thomas type role that he used to play. But going against the Eagles, I mean, Sam Bradford took a step forward last week. He didn't throw to any receivers that really mattered in fantasy, but he did take a step forward and threw 3 touchdowns. Jordan Matthews, excellent play this week. I love it. Mike Clay was saying that he believes that Brandon Browner is going to shadow Jordan Matthews. Now, I don't know what the Saints would think with shadowing Brandon Browner on anybody, let alone the opposing team's best receiver. He's actually graded out as PFF's worst corner through the first 4 weeks. How are you feeling about the Eagles passing attack? Do you feel a little bit better after seeing it last week?
I mean, they were awful in the first half, and I think if you watch that game, they had 3 pretty long passes, a couple of touchdowns, 1 to Cooper, 1 to Miles Austin, and then they had a long pass to Aguilar, and they were all on the same corner, Chris Culliver, I believe, and he was barely able to walk before the game, and I guess he was highly questionable, and they allowed him to play. So I'm not exactly buying into the Eagles' offense and their ability to stretch the field. I think what you're going to see is a lot of Sam Bradford dumping it off to the running backs and throwing it to Jordan Matthews as he was doing kind of the previous games. And that's going to be their offense. And it could be a successful offense. So I think guys who may be coming off of Jordan Matthews a bit, I think he's going to step right back in, continue to be heavily targeted, and hopefully he can get on the scoreboard a couple of times, and that's what's really going to boost him up.
Yeah, the weird part to me is that the Eagles don't seem to be running as many plays. They don't seem to be running that hurry up that they did under Chip Kelly, the last couple of years. They've actually had 2 games this year where they've had less than 63 snaps, I want to say. So they've had a low play count. But the neat part to me is that I was looking through it, and Sam Bradford, I didn't get a chance to see the game. So, I have to trust, our team that's behind us that kind of looks at all the game tape and grades every single play, every player. And they looked at Sam Bradford and gave him a plus 4.2 from this week. So they obviously seen something in him that he did well, because the 2 prior weeks, negative 3.5 and negative 3.2, he was graded extremely negatively. I talked to Mike Clay about it, and he said that Bradford just didn't look good. But last week, obviously, he did. So I'm wondering if it may have just taken some time for this offensive line to gel. I don't know if it's the fact that Sam Bradford has played for like 10 different offensive coordinators in his, short career. I hope to see this offense turn around, because it was fun to watch when they did. Not to say that Chip Kelly's a genius or anything like that, but it was fun to watch when they were moving the ball down the field. And I think everybody would welcome, DeMarco Murray coming back and actually, running the ball for, over 20 yards again, and not celebrating, like it's, the biggest thing in the world. Like when he had, how long was that run that he had this past week?
I think it was 30, like the 30 and change, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then he got up and looked around at everybody like, yeah, look at me now. Look at me. And I'm like, well, that doubled your total on the year. But I think we all just do want to see him get going again, just because it just brings another running back that we could actually use in fantasy, because they seem to be dying very fast. But the best thing about fantasy, like the best thing about daily fantasy, football's back, guys. It feels like the playoffs thanks to 1 Week Fantasy at DraftKings.com. With millions being won each week, every play and every game can take you closer to a life-changing payday. This isn't just fantasy as usual. You don't have to worry about that running back that you're going to try and project for 16 touches that is playing, or if he's sitting on your bench. You get to pick any player you want. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000. Enter PFF for free entry now at DraftKings.com. That is DraftKings.com. Kevin, I've been playing more and more DFS as the years as it goes on. And I was talking to Jeff Ratcliffe about it. And I told him, I was like, man, I'm gonna make this a huge DFS week, and I'm gonna set 20 or 30 different lineups. He laughed at me. He basically told me that's amateur stuff, and that he plays in 500 different things every single week, which is just crazy. Have you started to get more and more into DraftKings?
I mean, I've got into it a bit. I think I'm not setting 500 lineups, definitely, and I'm not really setting 20 lineups either. I've got it more on the low side. I mean, I view it as a really fun way to put a few lineups in there and, see what happens. But I have a lot of seasonal action going on too, so I got a lot of different things going on here. I did have a nice Cutler Martellus Bennett stack last week, which ended up helping me out in a couple of cash games.
Yes, no, that was definitely nice. I wasn't trusting Martellus Bennett until I found out that Jay was playing. Once I knew that Cutler was playing, I was like, okay, Bennett, you're going back in my lineup, because I just couldn't trust anything with Jimmy Clausen. We're going to talk about the tight end starting against the Raiders soon enough here today, but the next game that's up on the slate is the Redskins at the Falcons. We were just talking about the Redskins secondary and how they got beat up by Sam Bradford and a couple deep threats, some no names. Nelson Aguilar got going a little bit. What is Julio Jones going to do to this secondary?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. That's all I got to say.
That's basically what I want to after last week, the game script, the way it went, Julio Jones is going to tear this secondary apart. As long as the game script doesn't get too out of hand, that's the only concern I have, obviously, in this one. But have you heard the Roddy White comments?
I heard that he was complaining, and then everyone had there were about 6 different people that had the same variation on about, does a squeaky wheel get greased if it's fallen off or something like that, or if it's, if it doesn't exist or whatever. Just basically saying that Roddy White is, 1 foot in the grave at this point, so maybe it doesn't matter.
It might not matter. Leonard Hankerson, this is like the revenge game for Leonard Hankerson, isn't it?
I like Hankerson. I like Hankerson a lot. In fact, I've been looking at him a lot recently. I feel like he's one of these guys where his value, as far as what the production he's going to put up, isn't going to catch up to his kind of trade or market value for another few weeks right now. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's getting over 20% of the targets, is a clear kind of number 2 passing option. They don't really throw the ball to the tight end too much. I mean, you're talking about the number 2 passing option in this Falcons offense, which has been playing really well. But yet, I think I saw on Fantasy Pros that his rest of season ranking was wide receiver 50 or something like that. So I don't know. He's a guy that I'm actually looking to trade for right now, because I think people just kind of say Leonard Hankerson, he's going to go away. But he's had a few, good performances in a row, and he's being targeted heavily.
Well, you heard it here first, guys. I think Kevin makes a good point. I didn't realize that he'd been targeted on over 20% of the pass plays, but that's a huge share, and that's a really big share, and especially when Julio Jones is demanding the attention that he's been getting. And now, obviously, with Devonta Freeman, this offense is clicking. And this week against a Redskins team where, obviously Kyle Shanahan came from there, this is a team that I believe he might want to stick it to. I mean, you know what I mean? I just get that feeling that's who this guy is. I don't know Dan Quinn if he'll be all aboard, but he obviously knows who he's playing against. The secondary hasn't changed completely. I think the Falcons run away with this one. I don't know, but is this the weekend Devonta Freeman comes back down to, being Devonta Freeman again?
I don't think so. I mean, the thing is, I liked Coleman coming into this year. I thought Coleman looked better in the first couple of weeks. They had some tougher matchups. Freeman didn't really do anything. And then the last couple of matchups, obviously he's blown up. So he's even though you could say that Coleman was the hand-picked guy because he was drafted this year when they had a new offensive coordinator, new head coach, Freeman's bought himself quite a bit of rope here. So he's going to have to get outperformed by Coleman for a couple of games in a row. And the thing is that he also can catch the ball coming out of the backfield. So there's not an obvious situation where they have to take him out of the game. So I suspect Coleman will be mixing in at best right now. And he's going to have to break off some really long runs, which he can do in order to kind of pique the interest of the coaches to start working him in there more.
Yeah, no, I think that they have to ride the hot hand a little bit, but Tevin Coleman is going to steal some of that thunder, guys. Like over the last 2 weeks, between carries and pass routes, Devonta Freeman has had 88 opportunities. 88. That's a lot, guys. And when you go back and look at the game where him and Coleman played first in week 1, and Freeman had the upper hand then too. Like they had Freeman as the starter. He had the goal line opportunities. Freeman had 28 opportunities in that game. So they're going to come down. Like we know that the opportunities are going to come down. It's just trying to figure out, okay, well, do I trust this guy? Do I really believe that he's a borderline RB1? I'm not aboard that train. I'm actually going to sell high. If you're able to get top dollar for Devonta Freeman, I have no issue with doing that. I just don't see him keeping this up. Like he hasn't had to break very many tackles. He's hit these holes, and I think it's like the Julio effect on this entire offense. Like Hankerson's getting open because of it. The lanes that are there for Freeman on his one long touchdown run last week, I think he had to make one cut, and it was it. He was just gone. And I don't even know if I can consider it a cut. But Freeman's obviously playing very well. You cannot remove him out of lineups right now with how good he's playing, despite playing a good Washington run defense this week. The Cardinals were disappointing last week. I know you and I talked about it. I know I said that I would start Derek Carr over Carson Palmer. And Palmer, I mean, he threw for more yards than I thought he would, but the touchdown, he just threw for the one touchdown. But I'm all over Carson Palmer this week. I love him going against Detroit inside the dome. How do you feel about, is there a certain option on the Cardinals in the Cardinals pass game this week that you're loving, that you really, really want to find a way to get him in your lineup? Like I felt like, say, about Larry Fitzgerald against the Bears. I loved him against them. Do you think it's a Mike Floyd breakout game? Do you think that John Brown is due for it? Who do you have in this passing game kind of lining up?
I mean, a Mike Floyd breakout game. I don't know if you'd need like some combination of a Magic 8-ball and a Ouija board or something to figure out when that's coming, because it's just not, you could sit around all season waiting for that to happen. I mean, I think Fitzgerald is your guy there basically. But at the same time, I do think going forward that we could see the target mix shift a bit. I mean, we saw that a bit last week, although Fitzgerald has just been so good at being productive with the targets that he has. So he's really your guy there. I think the early word with Arians is that David Johnson is going to be the odd man out of the backfield with Ellington back. I suspect that Chris Johnson's going to be kind of your first and second down type of guy. Andre Ellington's going to be the passing down guy, or they could just split it up as a straight committee. So it's kind of disappointing to see David Johnson go away, but I think that's how it's going to work out there. And if you happen to pick up Chris Johnson, he could be a guy who scores some touchdowns if they get into some good game script, and they are a favorite.
Right. And actually, I love this game. Like, I don't know what the over-under is. I don't pay attention too much to those, but I believe this game is going to be so high scoring. Inside the dome, like I said, I love Carson Palmer. I believe that Michael Floyd is going to have one of those games soon enough. I mean, I know last week he actually had some yardage, which is more than we can say in a while. But I also think that the Lions offense is going to score some points in this one. You saw what Todd Gurley was able to do last week against them. Amir Abdullah, the Lions are using him incorrectly. That's the best way I could put it. He's not a workhorse running back. As much as I like Abdullah, he's not that guy. I mean, I don't know if Zach Center's that guy either. But Abdullah is not being utilized in the screen game. They're using Theo Riddick, and Riddick's really good at what he does. Like he's a passing down specialist. He's great in the hurry up offense. So they essentially have the same guy. Abdullah's just got some more cut to him, like where he can run the ball, just not necessarily an every down type of back. But I do think that this is the week where Calvin Johnson, comes back into the top 5 wide receivers. I don't know how you feel about this matchup with Patrick Peterson. I just feel like Calvin will like, as long as Stafford can get him the ball, I mean, I guess that's a whole nother issue. But do you like Calvin Johnson this week?
Yeah, no, I do like Kevin Johnson. I think Peterson has been a solid cornerback, although I feel like I hear about him more getting torched than when he's actually shutting somebody down. And you mentioned it with Calvin Johnson. I mean, he's had some really tough matchups. He had to face Xavier Rhodes in Minnesota, then of course the Seattle secondary last week, and then he had to face the Denver secondary. That's just a tough matchup week after week after week. He's getting a huge share of the targets. I mean, believe it or not, Calvin Johnson is actually getting a higher share of targets this year than he did last year. That just haven't been of the same quality. So he's getting 30% of the targets on that team, and that's an elite amount. So eventually it will come. And from what I've seen of him, I don't think he looks any different. You mentioned that Stafford's missed him a couple of times going downfield. So I expect a breakout this week in a big way. And in fact, I have an article in at PFF going over the target shares that probably be published tomorrow. And the title of it is Calvin Johnson is still elite, and I believe it.
Very good. I'm with you 100% on that one. And I've had people like, I was talking about Stafford on Twitter during the game, and people were saying, well, Stafford may not be that good, but he's not Calvin anymore. And I don't agree with that either. I mean, I watch him run his routes. He's still that freak, that size speed combination that he has. You've seen him beating the corners. He's able to, like, he stops on a dime for being such a big guy. I mean, even against Richard Sherman was on him a few times, and he did a comeback route. He created 5 yards of space. Like, it's just, Calvin Johnson is still that guy. It's just a matter of getting him the ball and Stafford, getting back on track. I don't know. I don't even know if Linehan's the problem right now when it comes to.
I think it'll come around. I mean, I guess the analogy you could try to make if you were saying that he was on the decline, that he's something like Andre Johnson last year, who got a lot of targets but wasn't productive. But when you looked on the other end of the receiver core, DeAndre Hopkins was blowing up, and there's really nobody on the Lions who's doing anything. So you can't necessarily single out Calvin Johnson as being a misuse of targets. If anything, they might need to be throwing him the ball even more, even though he's getting a 30% share.
Right, because he's not demanding that double, triple coverage that he used to get back in the day. So I think they're going to trust Peterson to kind of do one-on-one with him this week, and we'll see how that turns out. I know that Calvin has burned him in the past. There's been some past matchups where they stuck Peterson on him, and Calvin got the best of him. I want to say there was one game where he had 180 yards and a touchdown against Peterson. So I'm not shying away from Calvin Johnson. I'm holding on to him. I've had some sell questions, and no, I'm not selling Calvin Johnson right now, not unless I'm getting top dollar. So, but on to this, there's a funny story with this one. Greg Hardy, who's back from suspension on a domestic battery charge, he brought up Tom Brady's wife in an interview, talking about, like, basically, her, I hope she comes to the game, and then his wife's sister and all this and that. I mean, Kevin, I'm sure you've heard about all this stuff, and they're saying how it's an unwritten rule that you don't talk about a player's wife. And I mean, the last thing that you need to do right now is give Tom Brady more ammunition to destroy your team. Am I right?
Yeah, it's probably not the wisest move, but I mean, he ain't lying.
No, he's definitely not lying, but we are not Greg Hardy, and we don't have domestic battery on our record. We also don't play in the NFL. So we're okay to say that, Giselle, you are a fine-looking woman. But the Patriots, I think this is where the Cowboys' run of having close contested games ends with Brandon Weeden. I know that the last few weeks that they've been in these games until the fourth quarter, or overtime for that matter, against the Saints. I think this week it ends. I think Tom Brady comes into the Dome at Dallas off their bye week and crushes the Cowboys. Rob Gronkowski, Julian Edelman, Dion Lewis, light them up. I even liked LeGarrette Blount. I think you could start both Patriots running backs in this game. Are you with me on that one?
Yeah, I mean, they're predicted by the over-under to score 30, which is by far the highest of the week. They're a 10-point favorite, despite the fact that it's on the road. I mean, I guess they'd be favored by 17, 18 points if they were at home. I mean, this is just a huge lopsided game, and Weeden is just been, just as you'd expect, which is not good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll take the over on the 30 points by the Patriots. I could see this game being like a 38 to 21 shellacking. So I'll take the Patriots there. Obviously, we know you're starting them. The next game, the last afternoon game, I should say, is in regards to that Broncos defense against the Oakland Raiders. I know that the Raiders, the AC/DC thing, which is pretty neat, by the way. I kind of like it. The whole Amari Cooper being AC, and then you have Derek Carr being DC, AC/DC. What is back in black? Like the Raiders. It just kind of works out. I think it's very fitting, but I think that love story kind of ends in Denver. I don't think that Amari Cooper is going to overcome this secondary. I think they're going to be ready for him. But who I do like is a deep sleeper, and I want to get your take because we all know who the big players are in this game. What do you think about Roy Halou?
Well, that would be a speculative play, I would say. But I liked Haluk a lot coming into this season. Not that I didn't like Latavius Murray. I thought Latavius Murray was solid, but if you look at Murray, he didn't have much of a history. And Halou is one of those guys where he gets typecast as this third down role, but yet he's 200 and something pounds. He was a workout warrior. His combine measurements across the board were fantastic, and he's always been efficient and productive whenever he's had the ball in his hands. And there was a play last week, if you were watching the game, where they threw the ball out to him near the goal line, and there were two defenders out there to get him, and he just ran right around him like they were stuck in the mud. So I think he's a guy who could get more and more into the mix and carve out a role there. But like I said, he has been typecast, so I don't know if you can really start him. I wouldn't start him if it in a non-PPR league.
Right, and you're right, and it is a speculative play, but I think it's more of like along the lines of like a tournament play. You could throw a dart out there. He's going to cost you like a minimum salary, but I think Latavius Murray found himself a little bit in the doghouse. And I know what play you're talking about with Halou because it's the Bears, and obviously I was watching that game, and it was sad because like he caught the ball towards the sideline, and it was just like these guys like they didn't know what to do. It was like Roy Halou just like mesmerized them and said, "You stay there. I'm just going to run into the end zone, okay?" And it happened.
It was like a Jedi mind trick or something.
It was something. There was something involved there with hallucinogens. I don't know, but I'm going to talk to Roy Halou about it tomorrow. I'll let you know how that goes. But Latavius Murray looked like garbage in that game. Like, I don't know how else to put it. I'm a huge Latavius Murray fan. I like him, but he looked awful against the Bears. The Bears' run defense is a little bit underrated. People, I think, underrated a little bit, but their secondary is awful. And Latavius Murray had countless opportunities to catch the ball out of the backfield. He let two of them bounce off his chest. One of them resulted in an interception. He fumbled in the game. Like, there was just a whole lot of bad out of Latavius Murray, and I thought he actually got hurt. I thought it was his collarbone, but as it turns out, he's okay. They said that he was benched. He wasn't benched or whatever for fumbling or causing that interception, whatever the case may be. But against the Broncos, I was fading Adrian Peterson last week. I'm fading this entire Raiders offense this week. I just don't see much going on with the Broncos. The Broncos defense is just too shut down. Would you feel comfortable starting anybody against the Broncos right now on Oakland?
Yeah, I would feel comfortable starting Amari Cooper just because he's one of those guys, one of the few guys where you can really just assume he's going to get targets. And I know that the Broncos secondary has been very strong, but we're talking about, a couple of bigger corners. And I think what they've been very successful doing, at least in matchups that I've watched, is they being physical with smaller guys, and nobody's, at least no rookie, runs routes like Amari Cooper does. So I think he might be able to squeeze out a little bit of space and be able to get open out there, despite the fact that the corners have been so good. And it is a game, again, where they're going to be playing from behind probably. So he could get targeted, and I think he could look good out there. I don't know if Crabtree seems like he could just get swallowed up by these guys because he kind of fits right into that mold of a bigger but yet slower guy that can't get open against a bigger cornerback.
Right, and what interests me a little bit is like what they're going to do. Are they going to have Aqib Talib shadow Amari Cooper around the field, or are they just going to play sides? Chris Harris obviously stays in the slot, but I'm curious to see how that works out because, if they shadow Talib with Cooper, Crabtree could have a day. But I'm with you, though. I actually like the analysis there. Amari Cooper, I feel a little bit better about him after hearing you say that. So I think he'll get loose for something. I just don't think he scores this week. he made a fantastic grab against the Bears. But Amari Cooper, I think he's more of a top 20 receiver this week than he was like top 10 for me last week. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Actually, if they didn't count that touchdown last week, that would have been a pretty poor showing for Amari Cooper. So hopefully he can get a little bit more volume this week.
Yes, no, thank God all my DFS lineups appreciated the fact that they counted that toe tap, when he caught that ball. But moving on from the Broncos Raiders, moving into the 49ers at the Giants. This game's going to be on Sunday night. I think this is Odell Beckham's breakout game. I mean, I know he hasn't had that game yet, but I think that we're looking at a game where he's been, in the news, obviously, this week with him punching some of the Bills players and, temper. But I think that he's a guy that likes the attention. I think he wants it. I think that on Sunday night, he's going to show it. And I think that the 49ers secondary is right there for the taking. I think that this could be that game where Odell Beckham has 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Do you think that the 49ers can allow that?
Oh, I think they're very capable of allowing a big performance. And yeah, no, I'm with you on Beckham. I mean, he's somewhat coming into this year where I wouldn't say that I was high on him, but you couldn't deny what he was able to do last year. And things have just been a little slow for him this year. But I think things are going to turn around. I mean, he also is getting almost a 30% target share. So he's getting a lot of targets. It just hasn't been clicking for him so far. But I see things turning around this week.
Yeah, the 49ers don't have any corner that has graded out positively. So it's not like you could sit there and say, well, maybe they'll put this corner on him and then bracket with a safety. I just don't think they have that guy that they can stick on Beckham and actually, try and glue him to him. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think the Giants win this game. Colin Kaepernick he's lost whatever it is he had. He didn't have much, but he's lost it. He just looks like a guy that I'm sure you've seen the one pass where he went, there was nobody around him. It's like he's seeing ghosts, and he went to even throw the ball and it just came out wobbly. And it wasn't like he stopped because he even followed through. Did you see the play I'm talking about?
Yeah, I saw that. Supposedly he was working on his mechanics during the off season. And, that's kind of always a red flag. Because if you look at how he used to throw the ball, he used to pitch, I believe, and he kind of had a similar motion where he really had a big windup, and then he was just firing rockets over the place. So he's trying to make it a little bit more compact, and I think maybe that's even messing with him a little bit. I'm not sure.
I agree. I think he needs to go back to whatever he was doing because while he wasn't great before, he was still winning games. Like, it just looks really bad. Anquan Bolden's frustrated. Anquan Bolden doesn't look very good himself, but man, it's really frustrating sitting there watching that offense because Carlos Hyde is going to waste. I do think that Carlos Hyde is a good buy low because I think that they're going to start to, I'll say, force feed him like they did against the Vikings. I know that they're falling behind in games, and they probably will this game again. But like I said, I buy low on Carlos Hyde, but Colin Kaepernick needs to find something. Hopefully he can get Vernon Davis back because he needs to involve something of familiarity to him because he's not finding Bolden. He's, Torrey Smith, he's not connecting with him on these long passes. Like, there's just something going on there, and Colin Kaepernick cannot be trusted. I mean, I played him in some DFS lineups last week thinking he could bounce back against the Packers team that he had in the past played well against, and that didn't even work out. So, take it easy on him. And that pretty much wraps up the Sunday night game. And then we have one more. We get to watch Michael Vick on primetime again. Whoop-de-doo! He's going to be playing at San Diego against the Chargers and Phillip Rivers. Mike Vick, man, he's hurting my feelings on this whole Antonio Brown thing. I don't have very many Antonio Brown shares, but he's so fun to watch. Mike Vick needs to get the ball in his hands. But the big question mark that I have for you, Kevin, Martavis Bryant. We know that, the one thing that Vic does well or did well is throw the ball deep. Do you trust, like if you're sitting there and you have a choice between maybe someone like a John Brown or, someone in that territory or Stevie Johnson, would you play Martavis Bryant over those guys with Michael Vick as the quarterback?
I don't think I would play him over John Brown. I mean, a healthy Stevie Johnson would be a difficult decision, although I think Stevie Johnson, I'm not sure if he's going to play this week or not. I think it's tough because you really don't know, number one, how they're going to use him. Everyone says that Mike Vick has a good deep ball, and he did always connect well, at least with Deshaun Jackson in the past. But, that was a while ago. So he obviously wasn't doing too much last year when he in his spot work for the Jets. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. We don't know how much Bryant's going to be in there. I think Bryant's your ultimate kind of ceiling floor type of guy, where so trust probably isn't a word that I would use with him, but he has the potential to put up a big game.
Yeah, he does. And like I own him in a few leagues, and I was okay with him with Roethlisberger. I knew there would still be some ups and downs. He's going to have those 40-yard games, but you'll take that because you know they're going to have the games where it's 150 yards and a touchdown. You know those are going to come. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Wasn't it in the last preseason game or in week 3? I can't remember which week it was, where Martavis Bryant was on the field with Michael Vick and they connected on one or two deep balls. Like it looked really solid. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong. I can't remember exactly when it was. I think it was at the beginning of a game where Vick might have been starting. But yeah, they connected on a Martavis Bryant was getting a lot of run during the preseason. That was before you realized that he wasn't actually going to be playing for a while.
Yeah, that was a little downer. No, but I mean, obviously Le'Veon Bell, he's worth the cost of admission. He's going to get the ball 20, 25 times this game against the Chargers. I don't see. Obviously, there's not going to be question. I think the more of a question is, do I pay for him in DFS? Yeah. I mean, Le'Veon Bell, he's the constant here. He's the one that doesn't matter between Roethlisberger. He might not have as many scoring opportunities, but excellent play. On the other side of the ball, I'm not loving Phillip Rivers without Stevie Johnson or Malcolm Floyd if they're not playing. I mean, I know he gets Gates back, but how good is Gates going to be? I mean, that's another person. I mean, he's coming back from a 4-game layoff. Are you trusting Antonio Gates in his first week back?
I think I would trust him more than I would Martavis Bryant. I think he'll be involved. I think it really helps that trust factor if there are a couple other options missing from the game. I mean, Phillip Rivers isn't someone who's stretching the field right now. That might be a consequence of who is receiving options for him. I mean, Malcolm Floyd is the only guy who really does that. So they're really using kind of the short passing game as kind of like their running game right now. And you've seen just ridiculous, at least PPR games from someone like Keenan Allen. And I expect Keenan Allen to have another huge week this week. I mean, he's not necessarily going to have the largest yardage and a total, but he's going to have a ton of reception. So Antonio Gates is a guy that Rivers really trusts. So I see him also being part of that substitution for a running game with the short passing game.
Yeah, and I think Melvin Gordon, he's on like a watch list for me. Like, I can't express how high I was on him last week. I loved Melvin Gordon. I thought it was his breakout game, and it didn't happen. Obviously, he's had some really good game scripts like that, or not good game scripts, some good matchups that he should have been able to take advantage of. But San Diego themselves they're not taking advantage of these easy games that they're supposed to be winning. And I just don't think that Pittsburgh is going to be, any easier than the games they've played. So Melvin Gordon for me right now, he's just, despite getting, an average about 14, 15 carries a game, he's just a flex option. He's just, if he's not breaking those long runs, he's not doing much for you. He's not scoring any touchdowns. Danny Woodhead is what he is. And, he's not going to go away. He's not going to continue to score 2 touchdowns a week, but I don't know. Melvin Gordon, before he was on my buy low, but right now it's kind of like just, wait for it all to click and the Chargers to start, winning games, I guess. Are you on board with that? Are you still aboard the whole, I'm buying Melvin Gordon?
No. I mean, I think Woodhead just looks too good. And it's another one of those situations where I'm more comfortable with the guys who are maybe have a complement in the running game that is a big back, let's say complement, because there's no real need to bring in the big back at any point in time. But when you have a complement in the passing game who's a receiving back, then you just run that risk that when the game plan goes to throwing the ball, that a guy can get phased out and just not get enough on-field action. And I think we've seen that with Gordon when they've gone behind.
Well, there you go, guys. You heard it here first. Kevin, you were great today, as usual. Make sure you guys go follow him on Twitter at Cole_Kev. You can follow me at Mike Tagliere NFL. We're going to be getting out of here, guys. But don't forget, if you guys want, subscribe to us on PFF Radio on iTunes. You can listen on Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio, and watch the show on YouTube, as well as Fantasy Sports Network. And if you haven't yet, you could sign up for PFF, the gold subscription. It is just $29.99, guys, over the entire season. It's very cheap for what you get, including all the DFS tools. It gives you a DFS optimizer where it literally takes our rankings, puts them into a lineup for you. You just go in there and you click the button, submit, and you win some money. So that could pay for a subscription in itself, guys. But we're going to be getting out of here. We will talk to you in week 6. Looking forward to that. Hopefully you guys can win your week 5 matchups. But until next time, guys, lights out.